Pyromancy is a delicate balance between longing and fear. Long for the fire and the knowledge which it carries, but do not treat it simply as a vessel for teachings. Treat it as an adversary, watching for the moment when you give into arrogance. That is when you will lose control. That is where chaos begins. This video will provide an in-depth view on the pyromancers of the Great Swamp, as well as the Daughters of Chaos as they are presented in Dark Souls 3. As far as I am aware, there are no dedicated videos that focus primarily on the Great Swamp pyromancers, despite there being quite a bit of lore about them. In this respect, it will be similar to my giant video, focusing on a part of lore which has not been delved into. The Great Swamp is, for lack of a better word, a school of pyromancy. Nestled in what has been described as a dangerous hinterland, it is a haven for pyromancers that have been banished from their respective lands for practicing what most of the Dark Souls world seems to view as unsavory magic. The description of the tattered cloth set from Dark Souls 1 reads, "Robe worn by pyromancers of the Great Swamp. Their attire offers substantial protection against poison, fire, and other forces of nature out in the hinterlands where they were driven." Driven is an interesting choice of word. It implies that the pyromancers of the Great Swamp were forced to enter the dangerous hinterlands by whatever forces exiled them. Instead of death, however, some seem to flourish in the nature-covered swamp, finding strength. Laurentius from Dark Souls 1 states,
"A pyromancer must be in tune with nature herself. My home, the Great Swamp, is an abundant store of nature."
This implies that pyromancy is not dependent on reverence to the gods or to a faith, but rather from the power and wisdom that comes from within. Because of this, as Laurentius says, pyromancy is rather primitive and does not mesh well with advanced culture. The description of the poison mist pyromancy describes the Great Swamp pyromancers to be rooted in heresy. If we interpret advanced culture to have a reference to organized religion, it would make sense for these pyromancers to be considered heretical and thrown out for not abiding by the status quo. The knowledge of the Great Swamp was taught orally. The description of the Great Swamp pyromancy tome reads, "Spells of the Great Swamp are passed down from master to pupil. Without a master, there is no pupil, but without a pupil, there is also no master." It is unknown whether multiple pupils can be taken by a single master. If a master can only take one, then it is, in some ways, comparable to the master and apprentice relationship seen in the Star Wars films. We can understand certain parts of the distribution of knowledge in the history of the Great Swamp through evidence provided in the games. We understand that when control of the Chaos Flame was lost, the bed of chaos was born, but controlled pyromancies were not. They were created after by those who learned to use the flame in organized ways. This is evidenced by the Great Combustion pyromancy being seen as simplistic and mocked for this reason, while the caster of the Fire Whip is looked upon with respect, as it is a controlled version of Great Combustion and allegedly very difficult to master. While the Bed of Chaos is known as the Mother of Demons, her daughter Quelana is known as the Mother of Pyromancy and is responsible for the creation of many spells used by the player and NPCs. Quelana tells us in Dark Souls 1 that she is the only one to escape the wrath of the Chaos Flame, and implies that her mother and sisters know where she is, but we'll talk about this later on, as it almost certainly is a lie. After leaving Izalith, Quelana stumbled upon Salaman, who she describes as bungling or clumsy in other words. Salaman would be her first student. It is important to know that when this teaching began, the Great Swamp had not yet been created. Much of the world presumably was not aware of the existence of pyromancy yet, except for perhaps Carthus, which had a divergent evolution of pyromancy. While Quelana initially talks of Salaman in less than complimentary, she commends him by saying that he has made something of himself, somewhat glad with the resulting pyromancer which she had taught. There is not much information about Salaman in the games, other than the Great Fireball was his pyromancy of choice, so much so that he was given the nickname of the aforementioned spell. Even Quelana describes him as the master pyromancer, even though she was his teacher. According to Quelana, this tutelage occurred approximately 200 years before the events of Dark Souls 1, meaning that the Great Swamp is also less than 200 years old, as Salaman would go on to found the school after his teachings were complete, even taking on a pupil of his own, Carmina. It is also important to note that Salaman did not create the Great Fireball pyromancy himself, which shows the difficulty of actually designing a new pyromancy. Carmina is also a well-accomplished user of pyromancy, and was so well taught by Master Salaman that he was able to create quite a few spells himself. He is credited with taking the art of pyromancy in a new direction. This new direction was more focused on defense, while pyromancy up to Carmina's time had almost all been focused on offense. Carmina is said to be the first to learn how to self-actualize the flame and bring it internally rather than cast it externally. For Carmina to have the ability and skill to learn how to use the flame on oneself without causing violent and instant death is a testament to his legacy. This is purely speculation, but since Carmina's pyromancies focus on defending the self from many different environmental factors like poison, toxicity, and fire, I would not be surprised to learn that these were developed to help both Carmina and Salaman travel to the Great Swamp relatively unscathed. As we know, the Great Swamp was quite dangerous, with the description of the tattered cloth boots reading, "The boots of the pyromancers were incredibly tough, on account of the rugged grasslands and treacherous swamps they must traverse." I believe it was at this point, after Salaman and Carmina were both established pyromancers, that they decided to create the Great Swamp, a sanctuary for those who wish to learn and practice the art of fire and peace. This is where we lose track of exactly who the next pupil was, but we can say that one of the next pyromancers to begin their tutelage in the Great Swamp was Eingyi. Eingyi helps us understand more about the society of the Great Swamp, and how they may operate and discriminate against certain ways of thought. While Eingyi was a pyromancer in the Great Swamp, he crafted two pyromancies that differed greatly from the established curriculum. These pyromancies were called Poison Mist and Toxic Mist. The creation of these pyromancies led to Eingyi being labelled, ironically, as a heretic in the eyes of the Great Swamp. It is interesting that while Great Swamp pyromancies themselves are heretics in the eyes of the rest of the world except for Laurentius, they can apply the title to others below them. It seems from this that the Masters of the Swamp did not appreciate Engyi's creations, and he was cast out for this. I think it is possible that he may have been cast out for the sole reason of being able to create new pyromancies, as this might have been a feat not achieved in a long time. However, it is impossible to confirm for sure. As most of us know, Eingyi later travels to Izalith and becomes a servant of chaos. This shows to us that the Great Swamp may not have been a free-thinking and all-inclusive school of thought, as it does show that they had rules in place as to what was allowed and what was not. At the same time or afterwards, Laurentius began learning in the Great Swamp and became an able pyromancer, albeit being somewhat antisocial and uncaring about others. At some point, he left the Great Swamp and headed to Laurentius, which is why we meet him in Dark Souls 1. He states, "In this land, pyromancers earn a certain respect. The Witch of Izalith, one of the legendary lords, is the godmother of pyromancy, so the day I became undead, I was ecstatic. I felt as if I'd been chosen to attune myself to the ancient arts." This helps us to begin to understand the relationship that the Great Swamp has towards Izalith. They obviously hold it in high regard, as it is the home of pyromancy, as Cornyx puts it. The description of Cornyx's set reads, "The long skirt emulates those worn by witches, who were the forebearers of pyromancy." Cornyx, at least, reveres the witches enough to copy their clothing. Great Swamp pyromancers even carry the message of "Fear the Flame" into Dark Souls 3, arguably the most important lesson learned from the collapse of Izalith. If you tell Laurentius where to find the entrance to Izalith in Blighttown, you will later find him hollowed, and most likely died on his journey to find new pyromancies. These pilgrimages that Great Swamp pyromancers seem to undertake apply across several others that we will discuss later on. This is where Cornyx comes into the picture, and is the first time we meet a master of the Great Swamp in person. He is pleasant and has a love of pyromancy, as eager to learn as he is to teach. But how did he end up in a cell in the undead settlement? Where is his apprentice? This would be very important to him to know, as he says, "What's a teacher without a pupil?" The description of the fire surge pyromancy reads, Cornyx is a venerable pyromancer of an older mould, said to have restored a number of spells lost to the past. This, I believe, helps us to start to understand why Cornyx has left the Great Swamp, at least in part. I believe he is left to discover and restore pyromancies that may have been lost. The master-pupil relationship of learning, while strong, is also prone to breakage, and can result in pyromancies being taken to the grave and lost forever. Cornyx is travelling the lands in order to find spells, both new and old. We can credit him with restoring at least 3 pyromancies: Fire Surge, Acid Surge, and Bursting Fireball. We will be discussing Cornyx later on. Let's take a look at Cornyx's former pupil, Cuculus. Cuculus is from the Great Swamp, like Cornyx, and most likely studied under him for a period of time. She is gifted in pyromancy and can actually cast poison mist for the fight with the old demon king. Part of the description of poison mist reads, Eingyi was driven from the Great Swamp, however his pyromancy continues to succeed him, meaning that his exile has not stopped others from learning his outlawed spells. Poison Mist, being a pyromancy banned by the Great Swamp, may mean that she is considered a heretic and has been cast out. This brings us to another theory as to why Cornyx left the swamp, to find his apprentice. The description of Cornyx's ashes read, Cornyx was tired and defeated until he found a final pupil, like so many pyromancers before him. Why was he tired and defeated? Defeated by his captors in the undead settlement? Or perhaps he feels defeated because his apprentice Cuculus fell from the faith and decided to learn any pyromancies regardless of their origin or nature. It's curious that we can summon Cuculus for the fight with the old demon king so close to the demon ruins where the Quelana and Izalith tomes can be found. Perhaps she was down there to retrieve these for herself and learn pyromancies that have been lost for many years. If you use her to defeat the demon king, you can travel back to where Cornyx was trapped to find a corpse with his set next to it along with the whip. The set is not Cornyx's, as he is still alive in the Firelink Shrine if you have spoken with him already. The set most likely belongs to Cuculus, and she has travelled to where her master was imprisoned only to find him gone. The notched whip description reads, Whip mottled with venomous looking spots, favoured by some female pyromancers of the Great Swamp. This confirms that the whip belonged to Cuculus. What the game seems to be implying is that she took her own life here, maybe assuming that Cornyx had been killed. This starts to chip away at my earlier theory about Cuculus being a lost pupil of Cornyx, and maybe she was sent by him into the catacombs to locate the tomes, only to find him gone. It's hard to confirm. Please keep in mind that a lot of this is speculation and I am not able to back up the theories regarding Cuculus. Also in the catacombs we can find the old sage's blindfold, along with a witch's ring. Could this imply that another Great Swamp pyromancer went looking for Izalith but died trying? He wouldn't be the first. There's always something interesting about the witch's ring as well, however. The description reads, The Witch of Izalith and her daughters, scorched by the flame of chaos, taught humans the art of pyromancy and offered them this ring. This would supposedly mean that the witch or the daughters of chaos taught more Great Swamp pyromancers other than Salaman. The description also mentions that the witches taught humans in the hope that they would learn to control the flame better than they did. I would like to hear your theories in the comments, as I am unsure as what this could mean. I'd also like to talk a bit about the ethics of Cornyx, as he has limits and boundaries regarding what he will teach and what he will not teach the player. His reaction to receiving certain tomes allow us to learn things about both him, the Great Swamp, and Dark Souls 3 as a whole. Upon receiving the Carthus tome, he says, well, I've never seen anything like this. This inscription, this tome is from the catacombs. Fascinating. On this day, the teacher learns alongside the pupil. Cornyx knows where it comes from the inscription, but not the spells shown within. This lets us know that he has not travelled or ventured to learn much about Carthus pyromancies, an art that has grown in a divergent way from Izalith pyromancies. However, he is eager to learn about them and joins you in deciphering the tome. When receiving the Izalith tome, he says, What have we here? A pyromancy tome from Izalith. Then you found the home of pyromancy. Brilliant. I will never curse being old and undead again. Now, show it here, quickly. Let us channel them together. The primal pyromancies known only to old Master Salaman. This confirms a few points I wasn't sure about in my previous videos on Smouldering Lake and the Demon Ruins. The ruins are Izalith, or at least a part of it. The tome is found in the Home of Pyromancy, which is referenced elsewhere in the series as Izalith. Also, he says that the primal pyromancies were known only to Salaman. This may imply that, even while Salaman taught Carmina, he never imparted certain knowledge regarding spells to him, keeping them only known to himself. Take it how you will. I'd be interested in hearing what you think. When receiving the Dark Pyromancy tome, he says, "I'm afraid I cannot accept this. This pyromancy tome is dark, and delves into the depths of men, where an untouchable flame resides. I cannot comprehend this myself, let alone teach it to you. It is a spell forbidden in the Great Swamp, and nearly everywhere else too. Only the terribly afflicted or burdened by deep sorrow could begin to understand this." I've already spoken about Dark Pyromancy quite a bit in my Carthus video in regard to Wolnir, but it is interesting to note that Cornyx has ethics when it comes to teaching, and cannot even read the tome itself. He seems to understand the dangers of wantonly teaching anything just because it can be taught, can have consequences that he doesn't want to deal with, understandably. The last tome that we can offer to him, and the one that will help us segue into the next section, is a Quelana tome. He states the following when you offer it to him. "By the gods." This inscription reads, "Quelana, the ancient deity, one of the witches of Izalith, the last of them who wandered the lands. Then she must have returned to Izalith after all. But I regret to say I cannot accept this. Quelana's pyromancies are for witches, and must be learned from a mistress. But thank you for allowing me to peer upon such a thing. If only I were a woman." Firstly, he is aware of who Quelana is, and knows that she is alive, even while Eingyi and Ceaseless Discharge believe that she is probably dead, and exists only as a spectre or ghost. The fact that she returned to Izalith may confirm that the corpse we see rotting next to what appears to be a giant dead spider is Quelana. The spider resembles the fair lady from Dark Souls 1, although without the actual lady part sticking out from the front. Furthermore, the Quelana Pyromancy tome itself appears to be wrapped in the gold-hemmed cloak, the clothing of Quelana from Dark Souls 1. All signs seem to point to the possibility that the corpse is hers. Let's examine this a little closer. Firstly, in Dark Souls 1, Quelana asks you to put her mother and sisters, plural, out of their misery. If she had said sister, singular, we could assume that she is only referring to Quelag and not the fair lady, so that this is a complication. However, the fair lady is hidden past an illusory wall that, to be honest, I doubt would be found by players on their first playthrough, unless they had a guide or were blessed with some crazy luck. Although, we do kill another Daughter of Chaos outside the Bed of Chaos boss door, so this might be the second sister that Quelana is referring to. These facts make it a point that is unknown whether Quelana knows about the fair lady's existence or not, unless we take Hawkshaw's theory into account that Eingyi was sent by Quelana to poison her. As an aside, we do find the white hair talisman in the lava inside the demon ruins. According to the item description, it belonged to one of the deformed Chaos Witches. Well, who's got white hair and is a Chaos Witch? The fair lady. This might imply that her corpse was looted when the demon ruins were breached, or compromised in some way, as the corpse that the white-haired talisman is found on is human, not a Gru or a Black Knight corpse, which might be easier to comprehend. All it really shows is that the fair lady was in this area, and this big dead spider only further solidifies this theory. Despite this, I believe that it is Quelana next to the spider. When taking into account Cornyx's dialogue and the tome's location, Quelana travelled back to the ruins and found her sister, maybe dead, maybe alive. This is where Quelana died though, as the last Daughter of Chaos. This covers pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in regard to the Great Swamp and their relationship to the Chaos Witches, but I do have a few little questions of lore that I would like to share as a bit of an extra section that I couldn't find space for in the bulk of the video. Number 1. Who taught fire pyromancies to the Gru? We know that tomes require either teaching or deciphering before they can be used by anyone. This brings up the question of who taught the Gru to use fire pyromancies. I highly doubt that they have the intelligence to understand tomes themselves, which means someone must have helped them. Whether it was Quelana or Cornyx or someone completely different, I do not know. Number 2. Were the demons attempting reproduction? The question of whether demons can reproduce or not has been brought up many times by lore enthusiasts. We do see quite a lot of eggs around the ruins, which look like they could be the same that the fair lady was laying in Dark Souls 1. Supposedly the worms hatch from these to infect hosts to become servants of chaos, but it got me wondering how the spider is able to do this without another spider. It takes two to tango after all. It was at this point which I stumbled over something called parthenogenesis, which is basically a trait among animals and insects, which means a female does not require the insemination of a male mate to produce eggs or get pregnant. One of the insects that is able to do this is the goblin spider, in real life of course. Since Izalith was run by females exclusively, it's just an interesting concept to think about. Number 3. What happened to Eingyi? Eingyi doesn't have a canon death in Dark Souls 1, but poison mist is found in the lava in the demon ruins, which might imply that he died there when the lava started to overcome some of the levels. Do you guys think he is dead? Thank you for sitting through another one of my videos. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it, as a lot of effort goes into these. I'm trying to do one a week, but please forgive me if I don't always keep this deadline. I'm semi-undecided on what I should cover next, so feel free to leave any suggestions in the comments. Until next time.